second spiel then. So Polygon wood was a wood pre-World War I. It was kind of a hunting area, had a rifle range and some other things. And it was laid out exact same way here as you see it today. And then during the first battle of Ypres in 1914, it was fought over by the British and the Germans, and it was basically just flattened. So whenever you see these things with trees, there were no trees. It's probably representational. You see the trees that were cut down on the right.
So
that's most what you're going to see. That whole place is just completely stripped.
So it would have started at the very, very beginning with trees and then
gone. Yeah.
Stripped to fortify.
Yep. So well, not even that, using the shells to shatter them. Okay. Everything just started disintegrating. Yes, stuff pieces of wood in shape for the trenches and things, but so anytime you see like woods or other stuff on maps, they were wood at one point. There was no woods during World War I. They were gone within the first shells, basically. Okay.
You know,
this was fought over multiple times, but what we're going to see is the British and the New Zealand and Australian memorials up here, because during 1917 this was one of the hot fought areas, and then it was taken over and held all the way up through 1918. So what we're going to start is actually, we're going the opposite direction of the battle. So the fighting was going this way. So when they started the lines in 1917, they fought for the next 8 kilometers and lost 500,000 men fighting across this whole territory. So this was one of the first parts they kind of took for this battle.
They being the British?
The British in Australia. So you'll see they're moving towards it because all these ridges, and I'm using air quotes, this is considered high ground, guys. This is what they're fighting over. Where you maybe see one contour line on a map.
Yeah.
So, so we're going to first come up on what's called the butt. This is an old rifle backstop pre-World War I. But it made it the highest point in the whole area because of the mound of dirt that was piled up there. So imagine fighting and dying over a backstop of a rifle range. So we're going to come upon it. It's got 2 cemeteries up here. One is the British cemetery. The Butts, I think it's called the Butts Cemetery. And then the other one we have the other Polygon Wood Cemetery. The back, you can see how it was a backstop of a rifle range if you think about shooting this way. The Germans actually take this and dug out the entire thing and made it giant pillboxes as a defensible position. You have natural cover. The attack came from this direction as we're moving it. They're trying to get up to the high ground. You can see it's gently sloping down. Fought over, the woods would have been shattered. Slowly moving up. There's a series of pillboxes throughout. If you walk through here, there's Australian and German pillboxes. There's one, I want to call it Schmidt's. So Schmidt's pillbox, if you look in the map, it was actually taken by a Lieutenant Schmidt, but also right here, the commander of the Australian division was a Lieutenant Colonel Schmidt, which is his brother. He was killed on this hill right here doing a handover with the British commander, Lieutenant Colonel, who was also killed simultaneously, either the same bullet or same round shell, as they were doing a handover. Wow. So after all this fighting, leading all his men up here, and he was doing the handover to be relieved, tragedy struck. So he's buried here also. Quite a bit of different history around here. If you ever walk through the woods, there's multiple bunkers you can go visit, walk around. You can see some of them. They're massive pillboxes. Trivia, you'll see one of them is kind of broken in half. What they did is they used to collect all the ammunition, all the rounds and stuff they'd found around the battlefield here in this area. They pile in these old ones and detonate them, trying to get rid of the pillboxes because they didn't want them everywhere in their country. It didn't work. It was so big it just cracked it a little bit. So it's still there. You can go see it. You can see all the shell rounds it took on it. It's supposed to be really cool. It's up here about in the middle of the field. We're going to kind of do a drive-by and I'll point out the direction of it. Great place to come back and walk in the summer and other times.
Are we going to walk down there?
We're going to walk straight that way. We're heading to Blackwater Corner. The picture above, you can look through the bomb-shelled walls of Polygon Inn. Before the First World War, corner Polygon Wood, the early morning of November 11th, 1914, during the First Battle of Ypres, thousands of Prussian guards, the elite German army, attacked through the woods towards the Menin Road. This is the last attempt to break through to Ypres. Due to fierce British resistance, the attack was diverted towards the castle, parks, some other place around here in the neighboring area. The Polygon Inn, along with a section of the wood, still remain in the hands of the Scots Guard, Cameron Highlanders, and Scottish elite Black Watch troops, also known as the Royal Highlanders. The German attack was repulsed on both sides. They chose to retrench on a permanent base. The Black Watch resistance turned the Black Watch Corner into a legendary place. So you can actually see a picture of the woods and how little it is. That's 1914, let alone what would happen in another 3 years of war.
The trees are already almost gone.
Yeah.
That's November 11th.
Jeez.
Notice also that date, November 11th, is the year the war ended in 1918. So 4 years later, what do you think this place looked like?
Yeah, it's crazy.
So remember how the Black Watch fought the corner? They fell back to more positions here after they had to surrender the woods, but they did that delaying action to kind of stabilize the line. So this is where basically the line sat for another year or so throughout the Christmas. For those who watched the movie or whatever, remember the Christmas truce? Yeah. The famous thing in World War I where they literally had a soccer game break out in the middle of the no man's land.
Carols and stuff.
Yep.
That was in here.
This whole area, yeah, along these lines. Between the German and the British.
Crazy though, this place was dotted with trenches all over the place.
Yep. But it wasn't as destroyed before because they really hadn't moved across the lines yet. They hadn't really been fought over. It had just been kind of falling back. So it wasn't as destroyed as it would be.
Second and third is where it really got.
Yeah. So this line really stabilized around here and pushed back until 15. Car. A lot of these spots, as the fighting was going on, the Belgians pulled back. They were fleeing the front lines of the fighting. There wasn't a lot of civilians killed in these initial battles because they'd already fled. Like Ieper was completely abandoned and actually forced evacuation by 1915. So there were casualties obviously at the beginning and other stuff, and obviously tragic stories, you know, back and forth, but for the most part, farmers saw the writing on the wall, they took their cows, if they could, and fled back into France, or if there was anything, they were quickly shot and eaten by the soldiers. It wasn't too far removed. Most of these guys grew up on farms, most of them knew what they're doing with a cow and how to butcher them quickly. And if you were walking around with tinned beef and other stuff, you wanted a fresh meal. Most of these British soldiers that were fighting here had fought in the Battle of Mons, retreated all the way into France, and then had to walk all the way back here. So this ruck here was what they did on average per day, back and forth with a lot heavier packs and a lot more uncomfortable equipment.
Yeah. Terrible boots.
A wool uniform in the middle of the summer.
Wool uniform, exactly. Flat shoes because they didn't have treading on boots.
No water.
Yeah. One canteen if you could find it.
No padded straps on their packs. It was all just like straight nylon webbing.
Big old nasty beard with lights in it.
Yeah.
This has a hill where that water tanks are. But hill 62. So these were actually in meters. So that's what it stands for. 62 is actually 62 meters above sea level. The interesting thing is the British used imperial system back then, but the maps were Belgian and French, so they left the numbering on the mountain for the hill. Hill 60, anyone want to guess how tall it is?
60 meters.
This is the famous war relics on both sides of the railway cutting of Hill 60 around the Caterpillar mine crater. In the years around 1854, both sides of the cutting were raised with earth evacuate. I can't speak today. From the cutting. So basically, they dug a railroad through here and they piled all the dirt higher on the hill than making it one of the higher points, because you'll see a railway on the other side of this. So the first capture by the Germans in 10 December 1914, when the Allies soon fought back, British military engineers dug long tunnels under the German positions, at the ends which they placed large mines. These were detonated on the 17th of April of 1915. British troops immediately stormed the hill, which had been transformed into immense sea mud craters, littered with shattered trees and dead bodies. 3 weeks later, the Germans launched a savage counterattack assisted by useless poison gas. Defenders lost more than 3,000 men and were forced to withdraw. From April 15 onward, the Australian tunnelers worked for a full year to dig a new 500-meter-long tunnel, half a kilometer, running from the shelters just behind the line on Larch Wood, which is that way. After more than, and then they detonated. On June 7th, 1917, 2 huge mines were exploded here. After more than fierce fighting, the British regained control of the high ground. However, the famous hill was lost again during the German Spring Offensive in 1918. After the war, the site was purchased by a British family and left untouched in its wartime state. As a result, Hill 60 and the Caterpillar crater are some of the best preserved war landscapes in the western area.
Yes, something interesting I think from the blast here is when they detonated it, they could feel that in London. It triggered they thought it was an earthquake. The seismic, whatever it's called, I don't know the word I'm looking for.
Seismic.
Yeah, seismic
sensors.
Yeah, sensors. But there's a really good movie about this too. Go to iTunes, type in Battle of Hill 60. It's about the Australian miners.
Oh, okay.
It's 14 bucks if you want to buy it, $3 to rent it. Really good.
Cool. Yeah, so this is, like I said, a British family bought it. And actually, it was a lieutenant colonel who had fought here, who was actually severely wounded here, purchased this land for 15,000 francs from the Belgian farmer, who was kind of like, okay, like, what are you expecting? And then he left it here. What he did is he turned it into a tourist attraction. So from 1920 to 1930, he charged like a franc to come in. They had a tower up here, so you could kind of look at the battlefield from the top, and had people maintaining it, keeping it in that state. And so eventually the British Commonwealth Graves purchased it, and so this is actually owned by the British government as like a memorial type place. And so they preserved it, the walk around here. The trees obviously were not here, but you can still see the riveting, the landscape where the mines and the artillery shells. So we're going to walk through that, and then we're going to kind of skirt along it. There's going to be a park, and we'll see there's a couple of these big, huge mines. Most of them are filled in. The mining operations were huge. 17, 18 large mines were launched during this initial offensive. I mean, if you think about it, there's still a giant man-made lake that was all because of one giant explosion. So they're massive.
If you come back here, the side trail right here goes back in here, and there are 3 or 4 little bunkers you can actually climb in.
Okay, that's good to know.
Well, the unique is the railroad. If you look down with a cut, you can actually see Ypres from here and use it as a spotting location. So if there was not fog, you could see the city and start calling your artillery in.
Yeah.
Unobstructed. So one of the main reasons it was fought over so much. There's some flats all the time. Craters? Yep. Craters and just picture trying to move the blood. Frontline, 1914. Where this was made. You can see why this place is called. This way, and then we'll circle around Ypres that way. And we're basically going to make a giant loop. Okay. Another thing, we're going to go around the canal. So back across the German line here. Now I want you guys to have that trench line right across here, and what trench line? Bonus points into another first floor. Line for you. Close. Civil War.
lunch.
This is lunch, and we're a little early. was one of the largest contingents to contribute to the third battle of Ieper, Passendale. So they did a lot of the heavy lifting for some of these major engagements all the way through here, took heavy casualties. And so this was kind of one of the big, if you want to call them, battle honors for the Canadians throughout their history. So this monument was built with soil from every province in Canada, was brought in for this moment. They built this monument using Canadian stone, everything. They really wanted to bring a part of Canada here to recognize the event. Again, remember how difficult it was for Australians to get here. Canadians weren't much better to get across the ocean if you were trying the 20s and 30s. This wasn't exactly an easy thing, so this was really a symbolic representation of their effort. I've been told the reason that this planted this way was to represent like a giant shell. So what you had is the bushes were supposed to show shrapnel and show how it's pushed away from this thing. So it's kind of why it's in a circle. They're supposed to show the shrapnel, show the blast rate. It's almost supposed to be like a representational of if a shell was going off, what it would look like to go out. So if you kind of picture, that's how they planted the bushes here. They keep them trimmed in that circle. That's kind of was the concept at this point. And it was dedicated to kind of all Canadians. So it's not really as much of a cemetery as more of a memorial to their efforts. And they've got a couple dedications here, and obviously they've kept it up. The Canadian government maintains it just like they do with some of the other ones. So it's a very important spot for them to do too. It's one of the larger Canadian memorials throughout the Western Front. I think there's one in Somme, they're more individualized. This is broader Canada. I was talked to a couple Canadians and they all mentioned this spot was like, for them, this is their, like kind of like our Normandy Cemetery or something like that, where that spot where they, if you had to pick a spot on the Western Front, they know about this. So, yeah, so it's really a cool one. And they say with this column marks the battlefield where 18,000 Canadians on the British left withstood the first German gas attacks on this date. 2,000 fell and lie buried nearby, but it also is supposed to, that spot and it's supposed to represent also the rest of the battle as they push through. So Passendale is still a little far this way. So this is still that 8 kilometers of 500,000 people dying. Polygon Woods this way, about 6 kilometers. If you crow flies, 5 kilometers. So they're still pushing through. Nothing was left standing in this area. They're like, hey, we took it. And someone had to tell them they actually took their quote objective. There was just nothing here. To tell them. Yeah, well, how do you see? Maybe there's a scrape of a building, but it wasn't the roads anymore. There wasn't trees. There wasn't anything else. So it was almost a grid location like, oh, we won. We made it here. So.
Wow.
First part is there's 4
significant locations for the New Zealanders in Ypres. It's to commemorate the fact that 10% of their entire population fought in World War I, which is crazy. They had a population at the time of 1 million, and 100,000 of them came to fight in World War I for the Commonwealth, which I think is an insane number for the fact that New Zealand has nothing to do with Europe or any great power competition. You know, they're in about 17,000 of those New Zealanders died, so 17% death rate, not just casualty rate, which is
For the country.
like for the 100,000. So I guess 1.7% of their population died in World War I. A country, made out of two islands in the middle of the Pacific. There's nothing else around them. 1.7% of their entire population died, basically for fighting for the Commonwealth. Now, a lot of these are commemorated during Anzac Day, which is basically their version of just for all the battles. Them and Australia celebrate Anzac Day to commemorate all of those. Everybody that died in World War I, II, and so on and so forth. Now, some of the big monuments. This one is just a memorial park, but Menin Ridge, British Cemetery. We have New Zealanders buried there. About 840 names of New Zealand soldiers that went missing. They're not part of the death toll. Now for the New Zealand Memorial Park, this is on the site of the 7th of June 1917 attack. It remembers the New Zealand soldiers who charged up the ridge, and it overlooks the former battlefield and the entire Menin Ridge. On the site, you can still find 2 German bunkers.
Actually, that's the Menin Ridge, which is the other one over here. There's 2. This is the Passendale one. There's 2. Menin Ridge is the initial start of the battle, and then they kept pushing.
Is that a picture? But so you can still find the trenches. This is the centerpiece for New Zealand. So like how the other one was for Canada, this is the one that the New Zealanders use, largely remember World War I by, to commemorate all of their bravery. There is a memorial for Samuel Frickleton, who got the Victoria Cross for bravery. During this same attack, he took 2 enemy machine gun posts. So, like, the hundreds that were getting mown down, he was the one that made it and actually managed to take those machine gun posts. And another big one, there's actually a new one, the New Zealand Soldier Statue, which was inaugurated in 2014, so much more recent than any of these other monuments, by the New Zealand ambassador. It commemorates the New Zealand's involvement in the battle. And then that is it. And then they have the memorial to the missing in Polygon Wood that we saw. It has 378 more officers and men who died in the Polygon Wood sector between September 1917 and May 1918 and have no known grave. So overall, I'd say that New Zealand's contribution was huge, considering they had to travel literally across the world to be able to come here and fight, for the good of, I guess, the Commonwealth back then. Thank you.
Huh?
My hands are, my fingers are
Oh.
never do button on him.